2 episodes in, we changed it, and people went, no, that's not the show. It doesn't really matter what worked for John Pertwee and Tom Baker. It's about now. You know, Benedict became a star overnight. We watched it happen in real time, and that was forever ago, you know. But in terms of like online reaction, it was quite extraordinary.
Hi Mark,
Hello.
Thank you for joining me in the Radio Times Writers' Room. We're going to discuss obviously your brilliant new show Bookish, but also go through some of your previous shows, get a bit into your mindset when it comes to your writing projects. So first off, it would be great to get a sense of when you were starting out. Obviously you've developed this career as both an actor and a writer. Did you have one that was your first love, your first passion, I suppose?
It's hard to say. I mean, I wanted to do them both. And you know, very early days at school, obviously I was in school plays and stuff, but I also developed. I won a competition, and someone found it incredibly in some archive in Darlington. There was a noise abatement campaign, and I wrote this sort of sci-fi story about it, and that was published in a kind of little thing. And then the really extraordinary thing was I was in an advanced reading group with Mrs. Wigington when I was very young, and I just always loved reading and everything that it kind of opened up, I suppose. But when I was in junior 3, so I must have been about 9, I wrote a thing about Wimbledon, about which I knew absolutely nothing. It was just like the project of the week. And everyone went bananas about it. I can see it now. I'm doing a little picture. And it was just this sort of essay about tennis. And everyone went crazy. And strangely, then they completely backed me. It was just like I was some sort of... My headmaster, Mr. Dixon, called me Merlin. It was my only nickname I've ever had. And it was just like a thing. Suddenly I was the boy who wrote things. Oh. And my teachers from then on were extremely encouraging. And I suppose that's where that all started.
Oh, amazing. And then obviously we first came to know you for The League of Gentlemen, really.
That was a year later. I was 10.
Was writing that project different to anything you've written since? Obviously you've come back to it, but I imagine it must have felt different being that first thing that you'd written, and it was such sort of collaborative thing with friends. Has anything sort of compared to it since then?
Well, it's a very interesting way of working, but obviously because we came together because we'd all grown up with Monty Python, and Not the 9 O'Clock News, and all kinds of comedy influences and sketch writing. Really, that's how it started. And then when we used to write it as a live show, it was a sort of loose collection of sketches, and we eventually gave it a kind of narrative thread, and then that became the series, etc. But as a way of working, I suppose it never quite goes away. It was always just such a fantastic collaboration between the 4 of us, and writing with Jeremy. And Jeremy's just written me a radio play, so it carries on in a lovely way. But it is a very different way of working. I think come on to this, but the strange thing, writing can be very lonely, very isolated. But also collaboration has its own things. Sometimes, literally, this thing when you're sort of itching to write the words yourself, and you're the one who's pacing up and down, or the other way around, it's like. And then sometimes, I remember the second series, there was some little thing, and I just couldn't get anyone to understand what it would look like, and it can be, and you're going, I know what's up here. So I find, I'm sure that's the same for any collaboration, isn't it? It's a curious mixture of things, but the great joy of it is sitting in a room and laughing, and trying to come up with something we think is funny, but just the sheer joy of that creative act, I guess.
Does one of the 2 of them, mentioning collaboration there, does one of the 2 of them, either working by yourself or collaborating, does one of them come more naturally to you, do you think? Obviously you've done so many collaborations.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's just good to mix it up, isn't it? I mean, I've been writing most of this year, and I do sort of feel, I mean, it's a first world problem, I do feel a bit chained to my desk. I'm very itchy to go out and do something. And I don't know. I look forward to that, and I look forward to new collaborations and everything that brings with it, this sort of different energy and different focus, that people have. So it's a really intriguing way of working, I think.
And obviously the last time we saw The League, at least on screen, was 2017. We're coming up to 2027. Any new plans for more anniversary specials?
No. No.
No, you can't see that.
I wanted to subtitle our reunion. We did 3 specials in 2017. I wanted to subtitle it just about getting away with it. I don't know if we would now. So.
Interestingly, I was speaking with a joke writer recently, obviously a completely different craft, but I was amazed by how much of a sort of technical pursuit she saw it as. It wasn't so much, I mean, there was obviously creativity in it, but she saw it as like crafting a puzzle. Do you see that? Do you see it as a creative pursuit or a technical one when you're writing screenplays?
I think it has to be both. I mean, there's particularly, if you're talking about comedy, there's something, I think, endlessly fascinating and kind of almost mathematical about why something is funny and why things work. There's that famous bit in Neil Simon's Sunshine Boys about which letters are funny, and that's all true. Rules of 3, B's are funny, K's are funny. S's aren't funny. It's true. No one knows why, and I find that sort of stuff absolutely fascinating. Also, the great comics and great actors, often the same thing. That sort of concentration on honing something. It's like, well, why is this working tonight? It didn't work yesterday. It might not work tomorrow. I find that sort of that technical part. It's craft. That's what it is. So that part of it works across the board, and I think. Without feeling too contrived and mathematical about it, you have to regard it as a craft which you learn and hopefully get better at. That's the plan.
And then if we move on to Doctor Who.
That.
Yeah. So you wrote 9 episodes, I believe. Did your approach to it change over the years?
Guess so. I mean, initially, it's just obviously the sheer thrill of it. And actually writing, interior TARDIS and knowing it's real. It's not real. The TARDIS isn't. It's actually happening. But I remember, this is a strange thing to say, but I remember at the press launch 20 years ago in Newport, standing at the console of the new TARDIS and just being sort of overwhelmed with the fact it was happening. But somehow also within you, you're thinking, somehow you also imagine you're going to be inside the Curse of Peladon. You're like your version from 20 years before that. Yeah. So what I quickly became aware of was that it was a job. It was my favourite show, but you had to treat it as a job because all that stuff is the icing on the cake. But the actual process of trying to make it a modern show for a new audience is not about nostalgia. Yeah. And I think that's the great difference. You have to get right, why is this going to work now? It doesn't really matter what worked for John Pertwee and Tom Baker. It's about now. So if we're trying to get an audience now, this show is the same but different. So to me, it was always a combination of those things. And it's a strange thing because I've revived so many things, but I think nostalgia is a great enemy, and we have to all be careful of it. It's part of the reason we're in the mess we are. That I think weaponized nostalgia. Nothing's as good as it used to be, and yet people can't see that people have always thought that, even when it used to be better. Yeah, it's a dangerous thing. Weirdly, the first thing I did for Doctor Who, which was a novel, not of Virgin Books, in the interregnum, the dark times, the times of chaos, and that's what it's about. It's about nostalgia as an alien entity. It feeds off an alien entity that feeds off memory. Because, and it's funny, I keep coming back to that because as much as I love old stuff, you're trying I think what the job of the show constantly is to regenerate itself, you know. And sometimes when I meet, you know, grumpy old Doctor Who fans, and that you think you've just fallen into the same space-time trap, that it's not as good as it used to be because it's not for you anymore. If you still like it, that's great. Yeah. It's great, but it's not for you. The principal one I remember was Robot of Sherwood, Peter Capaldi, which had the Doctor and Robin Hood have a fight with a spoon. The Doctor fights him with a spoon, and my friend got married the week after, and we were at the reception, and another friend of mine's 2 little boys were spoon fighting, and I thought, that's job done.
Yeah, created something. Yeah, and in terms of, obviously, I know it just warned about the perils of nostalgia, but you mostly created new monsters throughout your episodes. You got to bring back the Ice Warriors.
Yes.
And
see, but I'm doing it now.
Yeah. And you got to play around with the Daleks.
Yeah.
Were there ever any other monsters from the past that you would have liked to have brought back?
But that's the reason. You know, I mean, right from the beginning, from the Gelf, you know, it's like, I grew up with so much, all this stuff that obviously went into an invention of space and time as well, is that that famous story that Terry Nation said the word Dalek just rolled off the typewriter. That's how it happens. Here's a Doctor Who fact. Every time I write the word board, like a board member, I accidentally type it as Borad, and I'm sure that's how the Borad in Doctor Who and the Time Lash came about. I'm sure it is, because that's what happens.
Yeah.
You just go, well, that's quite a nice word. I'm haunted by the Borad. So, and I remember Gelf did, I just thought, oh, it's interesting, there's something in there, I don't know. And then you're wanting to be the person who can come up with something as brilliant as the Crinoids or the Zygons, and that would be a wonderful thing to be able to do, but that's the ambition, of course it is. And then obviously there's the joy of trying to have your go at the Daleks or bring back the Ice Warriors, of whom I was always very fond. But again, we tried to do something different with it. And Stephen took a lot of persuading, because they were traditionally very lumbering and slow. And I said, well, what about if there's something inside it that's very fast? And then his eyes lit up. No, I got away with it. But not really, no, because there's a reason why those things. I always look back, as everyone does, to Tom Baker's first 3 years under Philip Hinchcliffe, and the fact that the Daleks and the Cybermen were an inheritance, those scripts, and the Daleks, they did something extraordinary with. It became Genesis of the Daleks, one of the greatest stories in the show. But after that, it was like new stuff, and one after another, the Wirren, the Zygons, Morbius, the Crinoids, and apart from the Zygons, who only came back initially for the 50th anniversary, they were left untouched, because you go, well, they don't need a sequel, do they? So I would say, again, the desire is always to create new. The problem is trying to think of something anywhere near as good. And also, I suppose, the nostalgia.
And you've written in so many different genres, fantasy, sci-fi, comedy, drama. Is there one you find the trickiest to write in? Is there one that's the most challenging?
Dying is easy, comedy is hard.
Okay, yeah.
I often think, particularly weirdly in the theatre, comedy in this country is still weirdly sneered at. Speaking of my colleague, I'm going to use the word erstwhile, because it's correct. My erstwhile colleague, Stephen Reece, they're a fantastic Inside Number 9 stage show. Brilliant. I mean, a triumph of imagination and twistiness and unexpectedness. And then one review said it was a lazy cash-in. And Steve said to me, yeah, because Reece took that one very well, I could just imagine. But I just thought, oh my God. I mean, they've written essentially 55 pilots for that show. Yeah. The breadth of imagination and variety is amazing. And then in the show, they took the format, the spine of it is an existing episode, but there's so much stuff. And I thought, how can you say lazy? Oh, yeah. And what I often want to say is just, you do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And so if we move now onto Sherlock,
That.
Yeah, we got the 15th anniversary this year. I'm not going to ask you whether it's coming back because I feel like everyone else, unless you've got an update on that front.
No.
But
I'll stop you because 15 is not an anniversary. Well, I'm prepared to talk to you in 5 years' time. But 15 is about. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You see this persistently online. It's like, it's a year ago today, and you're going, let it go. Or it's the 17th anniversary. It's not a real thing. Of course, I'll talk to you about it. But there's no point in artificial anniversaries. Yeah. There are certain benchmarks like 20 and 50, but I'm not sure 15 is one.
While I won't ask whether it's coming back, what I will say is you obviously wrote your own stories, but there were hints to previous books and elements which you brought in from Conan Doyle's work. Was there ever one that you were or could in the future be interested in, not adapting per se, but bringing in some way to the screen that you didn't get around to?
Oh yeah, I mean the whole point of it was we saw it as we just call it a restoration. We were asked to do like novelizations, and we said absolutely not. Go read Conan Doyle. And I remember lots of people who thought we'd been terribly clever by having Dr. Watson in Afghanistan, and then I remember someone said, "But that's it. I've just read it. That's Conan Doyle." I went, yes, that's the point. So wherever possible, we tried to, do it as a sort of version of. I think the best episode, which is definitely A Scandal in Belgravia, which is fantastic. I think is a sort of explosion of that little story, and yet it has all the beats. Sherlock still disguises himself as a clergyman. He has to create an emergency in the house. Irene Adler beats him literally, things like that. But we would always go back to Doyle. If somebody gets stuck and go, and funnily enough, one of my absolute favourite stories is a tiny story called A Case of Identity, which only really works on the page. But it's got little bits in it, and I think I maybe mined that like 4 times. I went back and found, isn't that a beautiful little exchange? Or there's something like it. There's someone, Holmes is watching the client, and they're havering on the street, and so he knows they can't decide whether to come or not, and then they pull rapidly on the bell pull, and he says that something like. A rapid bell pull always means an affair of the heart. It's so gorgeous. And there were little bits like that were constantly available to us, because he was a genius, Doyle was a genius, and he'd been there before.
You've written for so many big, fun characters. Sherlock, the Doctor, now Gabriel Book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Is that how you tend to approach projects, character first, do you think? Or do you go story first? Obviously, I suppose when it's an adaptation, it's a bit different. But with an original story, do you think of the character first, or do you think story first?
Well, this very much was the idea of it. I've always wanted to be a detective, play a detective. So I kind of conceived what it would be first. And then the stories follow that, but in terms of, the whole milieu of this, the whole setting of this, the post-war setting, which I'm very fond of, and I think is very underexplored, appealed to me. And then the idea that he is a gay man in a very dangerous time, in a marriage of convenience with his best friend, but the whole idea of this sort of bookshop being like an analog computer, it all sort of came together. But then the fascinating thing is, when I came to actually do it, literally, I said the words for the first time at some of the auditions for the other actors, and I kept saying to Carolina, the director, I don't know how to do this yet. It's the weirdest. I don't know how's it going to sound. And the weird, of course, the biggest help was Doctor Who, because I've also grown up with that conversation being had by doctors. Right. John Pertwee famously said, I just played it as myself. He'd never done it before. He'd always put on funny voices, and one of the reasons his Doctor is so great is it's so straight. And yet he's such a funny man, you know. But it was a really intriguing thing for me, I thought. And what we did, we started with the exteriors of of Archangel Lane, and it was a very helpful way of starting small, because I was making decisions all the time about my look, about, you know, fascinating thing. But that's as an actor, that's what you're doing, because you're building it up.
Yeah.
And thank God I had a bit of time. And then eventually you sort of think, oh, I think that's working, that's not, let's try that. And so it's a combination, really. It's on the page, and I know what it sounds like in my head, and then you actually have to think about how it's translating, you know.
And what, for this character in Bookish, for Gabriel, what elements of detective fiction that we've seen for so long did you want to bring to him from other detectives, and what were the bits that you wanted to be new, I suppose?
Well, you always want to be new, but I'm you know, deeply steeped in the genre. I've always read a lot of detective stories and always loved them, from Holmes to Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers and all kinds of obscure ones. And the fascinating thing is, after in the golden age, and there was a golden age of detective fiction, everyone was doing it, and everyone had to have their detective, and everyone's detective has to have a thing. And I was, you know, I think Agatha Christie explicitly sort of drew lines from Sherlock Holmes and did the opposite. Yeah. So Poirot is short and foreign, and he relies on a psychological approach in his little grey cells rather than deduction, etc. And then in the aftermath of that, there, you know, Max Caradus, the blind detective. There's a lot of interesting female detectives, late Victorian detectives. A strange one called Mrs. Pym, who I've recently discovered, who's she's sort of like the female bulldog Drummond. She's not very nice at all. I'm rather interested in these stories. I was drawing on all that to think, right, what's mine then? Yeah. So the idea of basically everything being in a book somewhere appealed to me. There's a synthesis of certain things, which of myself, I suppose, but also just the sort of character I'd like to play. He's a nice guy, and so he's not a you know, crabby or difficult detective, but he has a lot of darkness in him because of stuff he's seen during the war, and he has a big secret which he's sort of living with and having to be careful about, but also certain things which he discovered throughout the series about what happened to him and those he loved before the war. So there's a lot going on.
Have there been any projects where you've been surprised by the reaction, by the viewer reaction, either the strength of it or just viewers have picked up on something that you didn't think that much of?
I'd say the big obvious one is the immediate response to Sherlock, and we always talk about this in interviews, but you know, Benedict became a star overnight. We watched it happen in real time, and that was forever ago, you know. But in terms of like online reaction, it was quite extraordinary to see it happen, what an impact it made straight away. That was the very positive one. The opposite one was the incredibly divisive reaction to episode 3 of Dracula. And we watched that happen in real time as well, and it was like, oh my God, people hate it. And the really fascinating thing was when we pitched it in America and in China even, the bit where everyone sat up was when in our pitch Dracula comes out of the sea and you don't realise he's been in the coffin for 100 years, and it's the helicopters. Everyone went, oh great. We thought it was so good. It is. I think it's really good. But people, it's a strange, fascinating thing this about, I think, about an audience's, I'm not blaming audiences, but an inherent conservatism. We'd started the show as a gothic, you know, gothic Dracula, and 2 episodes in, we changed it, and people went, no, that's not the show. And I think it's really good, that 3rd episode. So did Stephen King, so that's good. But it was amazing how hostile people's reaction was. So, yeah, those are the 2 poles for me, I suppose.
You got a piece of writing that you've done, whether it's Bookish or something else, that is most personal for you, that you feel the most personal connection to?
It's probably an invention of space and time, because the strange thing about that was it's not even my era. If I were to write anything about the history of Doctor Who, it would be about John Pertwee. But the foundation, the creation myth of Doctor Who, I had grown up with as well, and I always knew I could do that. If you know what I mean, I wanted to do it, and I pitched it to BBC4 in about 2001. I think I've got a document about that. But then, if it had even been conceivable, it would have been a sort of like a 70s play for today, like in a white studio, so very impressionistic, and then amazingly, just because of the revival of Doctor Who, circumstances just sort of brought it into place, and I think that for me as a love letter to the show I always loved. That's very, very personal.